Hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club, which alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring Jesmyn Ward's novel Sing, Unburied, Sing. During this series, we will have read and discussed about 40 to 50 pages of the book each week. And this week we are covering chapters 7 and 8. I am Anna Traylor, the education specialist at Eudora Welty House and Garden. We are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and professor emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. And we are especially grateful to be joined by our guest instructor for this series, Dr. Kamisha Randall Swanson, professor at Mississippi State University, author of Maverick Feminist, and editor of the forthcoming Conversations with Jesmyn Ward, for leading our discussion of Jesmyn Ward's novel. So first, some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at that chat box every now and again. Suzanne, where would you like for us to begin?
Kamisha has prepared some wonderful discussion questions for us, but before we move to those, I thought we might see if you have any questions you would like for us to start by addressing today. Anybody have a question or a topic they want to be sure we get to today?
I wanted to talk a little bit. I know we've been talking a lot about JoJo and his responsibility and protection of Kayla. I just wanted to, and I know we'll be going chapter by chapter, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how not just Leonie and the people in his family see him as somewhat of an adult, but how he's viewed as an adult by society as well, because that's definitely a topic that is being researched and discussed a lot. This idea of adultification, where it's often applied to Black children and used to describe how biases lead to perception of them being often more adult-like than other children, specifically white children. Usually leads to a disregard of their need for help and assistance, and also a type of discriminatory treatment, especially by law officers, like we see in chapter 8 of the pages that we read for today. But many researchers have found that Black children are often treated as adults at the age of 13 or earlier. Of course, we see JoJo on his 13th birthday, whereas white youth are not expected to be fully responsible until well into their 20s. So I thought that that was just something to think about as we're discussing what we see as JoJo's somewhat adult-like characteristics in protecting and taking care of Caleb. But also, the research has found that this adultification leads to a lot of negative physical and mental health impacts. So that's something that I want us to be thinking about as we're responding to the questions as well. But I was especially intrigued by these two chapters. I know that I've been kind of a proponent of finding and showing grace for Leonie throughout the novel. When we first started, some people are saying no, and some people are beginning to empathize with her. But what I appreciate, one of the things that I appreciate is that we got to hear her voice first in this section that we read for today. And her chapter is more detailed this time around than JoJo's. But also, these two chapters bring out a lot of other themes that we haven't talked about a whole lot, specifically the concept of time and home and love, which connect us back a little bit to the epigraphs that we talked about at the beginning of the reading as well. So I just wanted to kind of share that briefly before we jump into the questions that I've shared or any other questions or thoughts that you all may have.
Misha, do you want us to start out by talking about JoJo and the whole issue of adultification? Shall we start there?
Sure.
Any comments on this? The way other characters are viewing JoJo? That sparked a lot of comment. Thank you. Oh, come on, guys.
I'm perfectly okay with if
Okay.
there's something else more pressing people want to talk about.
Yeah.
But I know that we've been almost commending JoJo for his responsibilities that he's taking on. But also, I want us to think about the negative impact of these responsibilities as well.
All right. Is that Susan? You have something there for us, Susan?
Yeah, I just have a small thing. I mean, it is hard on JoJo, but the scariest moment I think is with the police, who also adultify him, and so we really, and there's just so much weight on him. That's the thing that keeps distressing me. I mean, he's having to protect Kayla, even when he, forces himself to make her vomit and she doesn't understand it. And I mean, it's pretty horrifying the way he's forced into a role that he shouldn't be taking. And then, also potentially deadly.
I wonder too if Richie makes us see him more as a child. Is the interaction with Richie, where he says there's a lot you don't know. Yeah.
Definitely. And the fact that they were essentially the same age too. And Pop has constantly said that Richie was a boy. So now we think about JoJo again being the same age, interacting with this kind of eternal boy now in his ghost. And how their lives parallel.
Right. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I was thinking about the way in which Leonie, in the encounter with the police, emphasizes his youth. I mean, it's a section where where Leonie really responds as a mother. And she sees him as a toddler. She sees him as a fat-kneed, bow-legged toddler. I should scream, but I can't.
Can you give us the page number, Harriet?
I don't think I have it here. I just have it in my notes, so I can't give it to you. I also have locations because I'm reading it on Kindle rather than page numbers. But
I'm looking for it. I'll find it.
Yeah, maybe I have a page number. I'm just looking back to see. But I wanted to say, she swallows the drugs whole in an act which is protective. And is it Michael that she's protecting, or is it the kids? And it's certainly JoJo who is the most at risk in this encounter. And I'm thinking about her saying, a shield, I'm on my knees. Michael says, don't, Leonie, baby, don't. I snap, imagine my teeth on the officer's neck. I could rip his throat.
It's page 164.
There you go. Okay. So I'm just thinking about the ways in which she's protected, but also the ways in which she recognizes him in this scene as a child that needs protection.
That beginning passage that she was talking about is on the previous page, 163, at the bottom, where she says, it's easy to forget how young JoJo is until I see him standing next to the police officer. And then she goes on to describe him. He's a fat-kneed, bow-legged toddler, she says. But yeah.
Yeah, he's just a baby.
Mm-hmm.
We have some interesting comments in the chat that I would love to point our attention to. If I think that mentioning Richie would be interesting if John Browning wanted to speak up on his question on how ghost characters function in the narrative. But Mary Jo Tate also offers that JoJo acts more adult-like than Leonie does, which is what we were saying in this adultification, which Patricia Friesen said that she would love to hear more of the research on this from Kamisha, as this is something new to her.
Gotcha. Most of the research, when it looks at adultification, looks at girls, because Black girls are specifically adultified more so than Black guys, because they're expected to take on responsibilities in the home, taking care of younger children and things like that. But that's one of the things that I like about Jesmyn Ward's writing, because she turns gender and so many other things on his head. So you don't have to necessarily be female to be a caretaker, to be a nurturer, and things like that. But in terms of adultification, a lot of that research, like I said, is done on girls, and also in terms of their interactions with people of the law, whether police officers or in school. So in school, most public schools have resource officers, and Black children, especially as young as like 4th and 5th grade, are arrested at higher rates than white children who may have done the same whatever crime that they want to call it in the school system. So that's some of the research that's been conducted so far.
Thank you for that, Kamisha.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, Kamisha, that for Leonie, at the end of her section, when Given disappears, she says Given is the clock, the heart of the clock.
Mm-hmm.
And when he goes, time starts again. And then at the end of Richie's section, Richie tells JoJo what he says, time, you don't know shit about time.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole question of the power of time and the child not being aware of the time's power, giving a suspension of time for
Right.
What
They both are kind of calculating time by grief at this particular point, because Richie, of course, has, like I said, been a child for what seems like forever. So, of course, River has moved on and now has grandchildren. He even asked JoJo at one point, he's old now, isn't he? So he's trying to, that's how he's defining time. He's still this 13-year-old boy trying to figure out what happened to him. And Leonie is defining time by her brother's death. Of course, we talked about the fact that she only sees him when she is high. But that's one of the times when she also feels most guilty. And of course, when she's interacting with Michael as well. So this idea that she's still grieving, and that grief is essentially her calculator, or her compass as well, so to speak. So yeah, I thought that was interesting also. And then that last statement, she says, all delicious and damned. I thought that was very powerful to kind of talk about the relationship between her now dead brother, Phantom Given, and also Michael as well. She's essentially using Michael like the drugs that she's using to try to deal with the loss that she hasn't completely dealt with. She says at one point, especially when she's talking about her pregnancy and talking it through with her mother, that he basically pulled her out of a dark place. He was the only person who saw her during this particular time that she was grieving her brother, because her parents were still grieving too. Of course, he has a negative relationship with her brother's death, because it's his cousin who actually murders her brother. But again, just being wanted, being seen. She even talks about that in connection with JoJo and Michaela, that Michael seems to need her, to want her, whereas her children don't. So he's essentially this drug for her too. But Given reappearing when she's interacting with Michael, and in most times Michael and the drugs are one and the same. That's how she kind of calculates time.
Did you think that in a way she sees the children as putting a barrier between her and Michael? There's more space when the children are there, that she's not as close to him, and that she wants that kind of closeness.
Yeah, definitely. She even says that she did think about her mother asked her, "Well, do you want the child?" And for a moment,
Mhm.
she thinks, "No, I don't," because she had plans. She thought maybe she would go to California or somewhere and actually spend time just her and Michael. But she knows that her mother is a great mother, and she can't tell this great woman that she doesn't want to follow in her footsteps and be a great mother as well. So yeah, she does see him kind of a hindrance as of her connection with Michael. And if we think back to where she was describing how her father Pop used to call her girl, but he doesn't do that anymore. He only says Lenny. And then JoJo stopped calling her mom. She only says Lenny. And she also talks about how she was a disappointment to her mother and even to Given. But for Michael, she's not Leonie. She's baby. She's someone that has or deserves attention and care. And it's interesting that he calls her a baby, treats her like a baby, but his two babies are in the back seat needing attention and care, and he doesn't give her that. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Valerie, then Harriet, then Rachel.
These chapters are making me alert to this theme of getting stuck in time. Richie is certainly stuck in time. Leonie is too, I think, relating to Given. Given, not Given, is stuck in time. But to me, JoJo is moving through time. He's growing up. And I was thinking about your comments about adultification, which I haven't read the research, and there's, I'm sure, some very, very important things there. But to me, JoJo's love of Kayla isn't being imposed on him, but it's coming from his heart. He has loved Kayla and taken care of her, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I remember growing up one of 5 children, and I loved my brothers and sisters, and I wanted to protect them from the very beginning. And I have 2 sons, one 8 years older than the other, and I saw that happening through their life, that the older child would be real protective and loving of the younger child. So in a way, that's JoJo growing up. He's really on the cusp of being a child and an adult. That's not a bad thing. And having responsibility for others is not a bad thing, but rather more like Pop and Mam are.
I don't think that his love and care for her in general is a bad thing, but the fact that he feels like he has to do it, he needs to do it because no one else will, especially not their mother. So that has a negative impact, even if just like we talked about the berries, Leonie tried in this particular case to be a mother, to provide Kayla with what she needed. But JoJo is so fearful that she will do something bad that he feels the need to step in, to cause her to vomit, to get rid of this thing that might hurt her. So the concept of love that he has for her in general, no, I agree that that's not a bad thing. But the fact that he feels like he needs to do it and he's constantly fearful of anybody else's interactions because of it. Richie even says when he first enters the scene that he wants to tell him that you will not be able to protect this girl all the time, just like Pop wasn't able to protect him. So that part is more negative.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that the effect of having a parent who's stuck in time and who can't move through time to become a fully responsible parent. The kids really are going to suffer from that, mm-hmm. for sure.
Yeah, and not being able to trust.
Correct.
Yeah. Harriet?
I've been thinking about 2 different threads in what we're discussing. One is time, and it's my sense too that I'm thinking back to the Welty epigraph, and the idea of memory and a living thing, and the all that's remembered joins and lives, the past and the present, the living and the dead. I'm thinking about the way in which time is the thing that maybe Jojo doesn't know, that Richie does, is the relationship between the past and the present. Um, and and so that's one thread. And then the other one was really about Leonie and her mom, because I'm thinking about that first half of the chapter where we see their relationship, and she thinks of her mother and her father both being disappointed in her, but she has a pretty good relationship with her mother. She is able to talk to her about the pregnancy. Her mother is able to talk to her and say, what is it you want? And so I'm thinking about that relationship, but I'm also thinking about Mam's relationship to mother spirits. And I started, I was pointing last time to Mammy Wata, but didn't really articulate what it is that I'm trying to say about her presence. That is this idea of a water spirit that is a mother spirit. And here we have Yemaya, the goddess of the ocean and the salt water, and her shushing and her words, that she was holding me like a goddess, her arms all life-giving waters of the world. I'm thinking about water in the novel. I'm thinking about Leonie's experience with drugs, and experiencing them as a flood. Her mother saying, it ain't good to use anger just to lash out. You pray for it to blow up a storm that's going to flash out the truth. And then there's the drugs that she experienced as a flood, and she's drowned clean. But there's all of this water imagery in the book, which I think is important. I'm also thinking about these mother spirits across to Ward's Let Us Descend, which I've only read once and need to reread. But I think there's connections between these female spirits and Mam and what happens in Let Us Descend, another novel by Ward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think also that she's trying to use what Mam has said to her about the spirits to inform the way she treats her child, the way she treats Mikola. Yeah, Rachel and then Melissa.
Can I comment on what she was saying
Sure,
about those
sure.
storms really quickly before we
Yeah.
go? I just want to reiterate, but definitely there is a thread, not with just Let Us Descend, but all of Ward's novels essentially. So her first novel, Where the Line Bleeds, actually ends with a storm, and we know that Salvage the Bone is surrounded by Hurricane Katrina, and Katrina takes on a mother characteristic in this novel. She actually refers to it as Mother Katrina, and the power that comes from the water and how it destroys but also cleanses, similar to in this particular novel. And then, like you said, in Let Us Descend as well. So that's definitely a thread that's running through all of
Love that. Yeah.
Ward's works.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Rachel.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the grandmother figure in Southern literature more broadly as like a gap or a bridge between what we were talking about earlier with JoJo's parentification, and then the water imagery and the mothering that Leonie is trying to do. This read, I forgot in chapter 7 that Jojo essentially wishes his mother was dead. And I had completely forgotten about that passage when Michael is putting together the charcoal and milk mixture to make Leonie throw up. Jojo thinks, I wonder if whatever, I'm on page 173. I wonder if whatever medicine she cooked would help Leonie now, if it would make her so sick that whatever poison is inside her would come out. And that makes me think, I mean, he just made Kayla throw up because he was so scared that potion would kill her, but yet he's kind of hoping Leonie would take it in this moment. And I think between the two, between the parentification of JoJo and then what we're seeing in Leonie's chapter with her relationship with her mother, one theme that runs throughout Southern literature is grandparents stepping in as caregivers. And so often in Ward's novels, right, the mother is not there, the mother's absent or unable and to take care of her children, kind of like where the line bleeds. And I'm also looking at Amy Green's Bloodroot on my shelf. I'm thinking about why, like, why in modern Southern literature do we see so many grandparents stepping in as caregivers for their grandchildren, but also connected to that question is in this novel, we see a present mother who's there. We also see grandparents as caregivers, but it seems to be filling JoJo with so much more anger than I think we see in Where the Line Bleeds and in Let Us Descend. JoJo seems a lot more angry in this chapter and than in those novels where grandparents step in as caregivers.
I want to come in and say first the passage that you read on 173 where he says essentially he wondered if the poison that's in her would come out. I didn't necessarily read that as him wanting her to die. I took poison as to be both literal and figurative. Of course, she's just swallowed a bag of drugs, so she literally did poison herself. But also, JoJo does remember having fun interactions with Lenny. So he talks about the gum that she used to chew, and whenever he was around someone else, he was chewing that same amount of gum. He always, the same type of gum, he always thought about her kissing him. I think that he sees the poison as, of course, the literal drugs that she swallowed, but something else also that is hindering her from being a good parent to him. So I didn't necessarily see that as him wanting her dead. Even in the case where Richie says, "Is that your mom?" and he says, I tell him no, but I didn't explain. That's I saw that as him again identifying that yes, she is supposed to be the parent, but she's not necessarily doing the mothering. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to come in on that.
I was also thinking, Kamisha, about the fact that when she makes this brew, when um, she thinks she knows it works for adults, it's not good for children. And maybe has she said that? Is he thinking of that as well?
Possibly, yeah.
Is Melissa still with us? Have we lost her? She had something to say.
My comment was just going to be about the difference between the reach of memory and time in this book and trauma and shame, kind of how that's playing out in terms of JoJo kind of having to step up and be a parent, making up a little bit for the trauma that his mother has gone through and the shame of that she carries about maybe not being able to be the parent that she can be, maybe disappointing her own parents. I just feel like the reach of trauma in this book is so long, but also short. You know, when you see Leonie think about harming her children, it's like her hand and head that's thinking that, but it's also reaches back to her feeling about losing her brother and the trauma that she's carrying from that. And I think, yeah. So I'm just curious what other people think about how trauma and shame are showing up in JoJo and other characters.
Yeah, definitely in terms of the time, even when Richie says that he has to talk to Pop, he has to find out what actually happens to him. JoJo says, no, I don't want him to ask Pop those questions because then it will force him to deal with the part of the story that he hasn't dealt with, and it will hurt him in a way that he doesn't want to see Pop hurt. So even this instance that happened decades ago, will still invoke trauma, like you said. So it's timeless in a sense.
Harriet, did you have something? And then I wanted to ask, I'm not seeing hands, but on the top row of my Zoom call, I see Joanne and Patricia. And were either of you wanting to speak? Am I ignoring you? No? Okay. All right, go, Harriet.
Yeah, I have two things I wanted to say. One is related to that passage that Kamisha was talking about, where JoJo is singing nursery rhymes to Kayla to distract her, and then he thinks about his mother, and now I just lose it. That passage is so full of a sense of longing for a mother, and it's not something that we've really seen before.
79 and 80
in JoJo. If you've got it there, maybe you could just read that line for me, Suzanne.
I sing the nursery songs all wrong. Is that the way?
The end of that passage where he is smelling the cinnamon of the gum.
Oh, I see it. I can do it.
Oh,
good.
Let's see here.
Oh, yeah, I see it now too.
If you'd like to go ahead, Suzanne, you can have it.
All right. I must have been Kayla's age, but I could smell Leonie too, smell her breath, the red cinnamon gum she chewed as she sang past my ear. Even when I grew older and she stopped giving me kisses, every time somebody chewed that gum, I thought of Leonie, of her soft, dry lips on my cheek. Kayla doesn't care, even if the songs are patched together from my memory, pieces of a puzzle that almost fit.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just noticing that how much that passage is evocative of JoJo's wanting Leonie as a mother, and they're keeping and being pervaded by the smell of her cinnamon gum. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was trauma, because that's really the thing that I most wanted to talk about today. It's my sense that if there's, what we've been talking about, adultification is one theory that is to bring to the novel. Another one is the idea of inherited trauma. I'm thinking about the way in which the theory is, that say, children of survivors of the Holocaust don't need to be told the story in order to inherit the trauma. That children of parents who have experienced racism don't need to be told by their parents the story in order to inherit the trauma. And I'm thinking about the idea of the ghost. I'm thinking about the idea of Richie and not knowing Richie's story, and or Richie saying to JoJo in the car, they're going to chain you. That sense of being haunted by something that you don't fully know, but emotionally you do. I'm the conversation in JoJo's chapter where Richie says, I guess I didn't make it, but I don't know how. I need to know how. Riv will know. And JoJo thinks, I don't want to hear no more of the story. Pop never told me what happened. I know what Pop's saying. I don't want to talk about this.
It wounds me. Yeah.
It's on page 181.
Pop's wound of, of being, of not wanting to talk about, never wanting to get to the end of the story because he doesn't want to relive it. And JoJo's being wounded by it, inheriting it, and this idea of the ghosts that haunt from the past.
Yeah, I
I have
thought
a
that last line was powerful too. It wounds me. Like he's literally feeling whatever dagger has been placed into Pop as well. Not just it hurts or it makes me sad, but it wounds me. I thought that was powerful too.
Yeah.
I have a quick clarifying question. Is this something that we've seen? Do we know if Leonie had been born by the time that Pop was in Parchment, or did she happen after his time in Parchment? Okay, just
It's
wanted to make sure.
after, yeah.
That's after. Okay, thank you.
All right.
What you learn is that Leonie was 17 when she had her children. Yeah, I am just thinking the little things that come out. She's not married to Michael. Michael's her boyfriend. She was 17 when she had JoJo. They were filling out Leonie's story and why she is the way she is.
Mhm. Just to expand upon my previous answer to Anna's question. So he goes to Parchment when he's 15 years old, and he meets Ma'am once he's out of prison.
Once he's
So,
out. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Other topics to explore.
Would we like to view some of your discussion questions, Kamisha?
sure. I was going
Okay.
to suggest that, but I didn't want if there were any particular passage that people were leaning towards, I wanted to allow them to share those too. But sure.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and start the screen share. Are you guys able to see them?
Yes.
Wonderful.
So I tried to organize them by chapters because we usually do start with the first chapter, but we've been bouncing around today. So feel free to jump in and respond to any question that you like. I know that we started off by kind of being interested in the scene with the police officer, but then we moved away from it. But of course, that was one of the scenes that was most impactful in this reading. But feel free to respond to any, all, or none.
I think I would love to point out just some different lanes that we've talked about in terms of the adultification and how it's good that JoJo has this love and care and want to protect of his little sibling and that level of growing up. But then that negative thing happens with the police officers, that growing up and this acceptance of responsibility looks good sometimes and is good, but then it also looks bad sometimes. It's not these are not mutually exclusive things. We see them happening in different ways in these chapters, and then people, as we read it as the public here, responding to it differently as well. And I think that that's really interesting, seeing those two lanes separate.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Anna. I was actually going to suggest starting with the last question if no one had other things that they wanted to comment on, because we've talked a lot about how JoJo has cared for and protected Kayla, but of course in this particular scene with the police officer, she's the one who is protecting and caring for JoJo. So even in this sense, the 3-year-old is doing some of the labor of saving, so to speak.
I have to say that's one of my favorite moments in the novel. I'm so proud of Kayla for doing that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking too about the comedy of the scene. I have been thinking about this in relationship to Welty's dark humor, and there's more than one moment, given, say, appearing as Leonie is having sex, your brother appearing as you're having sex, the Kayla throwing up at the moment when we just can't bear the tension in that scene and are terrified. She wins the day by vomiting all over the officer. Yeah.
And of course, giving clapping for and after she does it.
I wonder if we might think about Al and the policeman and that white man at the store where he buys the charcoal and milk. Talk about those three characters and how they function in the novel.
I thought the man at the gas station where you buy the charcoal was very interesting because he shows kind of a different view of whiteness, even different from Al, who is seemingly helpful but has so many other problems that he bring with him. But JoJo saying he asked him how much the candy cost, and he read the guy's eyes. Where he said, "I would love to give it to you, but there are cameras watching, so I can't." And he tells him the price. So he wants to be helpful, but also he kind of sees JoJo as being needy, perhaps that kind of like JoJo mentions the teacher at the school or the secretary at the school who saw him as needy when he wet himself when he was 7 years old and was waiting for Lenny to show up and she never did. How Richie kind of sees him as needing sympathy and pity. I thought that was an interesting and different perspective of kind of white male authority almost.
I was interested too that when JoJo sort of leans over the counter, the storekeeper backs away, and then JoJo says, "I'm brown," and then he knows that he should back away. This is not safe for me to be perceived as a threat. So both of them trying to negotiate.
I was going to read that passage, which is I lean forward. He moves back just a step, small as a slivered fingernail, a twitch. I remember I'm brown and I move back too. It's a very complicated line with a kind of automatic response to when both of the part of the cashier and on JoJo's response.
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of speaks to adultification again, because he's a 13-year-old, he's a child, but then he remembers I'm brown, so I'm not really a child. I'm a threat to this person.
And the tragedy that he has to think that and has to be aware of it as a threat.
It reminds me of a line from Zora Neale Hurston's How It Feels to Be Color Me, where she talks about feeling her race only when she is amongst a sea of white. She doesn't have to remember that she's a Black woman until she isn't around other people who are similar to her. And that's the same thing that JoJo is saying. He doesn't always have to feel his race, especially when he's with ma'am or pop. He's home and he's comfortable. But in this particular instance, he remembers. So that talks about race again being a social construct.
I think I'm right in this, that Al and the policeman, I'm not sure about the policeman, and the storekeeper all have bad teeth. The breath. There's something about that's that.
Definitely Al and the storekeeper for sure. I can't remember if the policeman did it, but I know he said that he smelled a little sweaty and musty or something like that. I can't remember his teeth, but definitely Al and the storekeeper.
Other passages were sort of JoJo and Kayla are sort of breathing the same air, sharing the air, and then Gibbon and Leonie remembers the same thing with Gibbon, and then we have this sense of the polluted air from these other people. So
I would love to unpack Hal a little bit further. I find him to be such a bizarre character. I feel like he has this like strange upbeatness about him that feels really out of place in the setting. And then at one point he it's not the first time interacting with a sick Kayla. It's like the second time. And he's like, oh, there's like crackers and Sprite and stuff like that. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. And it's just like, I don't know. It's like a dark comic relief of like this, like, yeah, I don't know. And he's even able to provide more care, but like delayed, like, yeah, I find him so unsettling.
Yeah, of course he didn't think about it before because they were high.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. And each time that they leave his house, he sends them off with food. So he provides food for the children where Leonie clearly can't. Even though JoJo talks about his dirty dishes and how maybe the noodles are stuck to the bottom of the skillet. So, but there's an attempt still to feed the hunger. Um, but he's just an interesting character overall. So he's an attorney, but clearly he gets high just as much as the character that he's defending. He is actually the person who gives Michael the drugs, the
Yeah.
person that has just been released from prison, just out of his care. So yeah, he's definitely an interesting character.
Yeah, I think giving him the drugs is a very dark moment.
And of course, Landy bears the brunt of it all. Even when the officer pulls her over, he's concerned. Who are these two white people in the car with you? What's their relation, essentially? So she's having to deal with all of this.
And then after just having swallowed the bag, she's the one that has to move to the driver's seat. Like she's fully culpable.
Right. So she's not responsible for her children, but she is responsible for a lot of other things.
Well, do anyone want to take up any of these other questions? We'll take them off the screen, I think, if we.
Wonderful. Okay. Harriet, is there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was thinking about the drugs and the moment when Leonie pulls out the drug pack and Michael looks like he wants to turn and run, but then like she's hiding his favorite food. And 5 minutes later, they are high. There's this, in Michael, there seems to be a desire to resist returning to the drugs. There are moments when he thinks about the kids when drugs are when Leonie needs to escape and brings out the drugs, but he isn't able to.
I was interested in the fact that JoJo is afraid of Leonie, not afraid, but he knows that Leonie will slap him, but he also knows that Michael will. And not with his fist, but with a hand that's very hard and like a shovel. So, and on the other hand, there's Michael who's learned to love gardening. I mean, Michael is a perplexing character as well, I think.
Yeah, and I think that ties back to the statement that Ma'am actually makes to Lenny when they're talking about her pregnancy, where Ma'am essentially says it's not that boy's fault whose family he was born into. He could be a good person, but because of his history, it's inflicting a trauma and causing more trauma in Lenny and her children's lives as well. So he has a want and a desire for a connection with the earth, almost like her father. Leonie even describes him at one point, I think, where she says that his structure is tall or something, the way that Pop is often described. So in some other place, perhaps, in some other family, they could have been a good match. But in this particular case, the history of racism in their family overshadows and further inflicts trauma on Lenny and their children.
Other issues here that we would like for us to discuss. Yeah, Susan.
I don't know where this is, but there was some moment, and I missed last week, so I read the 4 chapters at once. But there's a moment where Leonie thinks about having another child with Michael, one that'll look like him, in the hopes that they can get it right.
That's
And
in this section on page 150. I was actually on that same page. Sorry.
oh, okay, well, thank you. So I mean, I find that really disturbing, especially when we think about what she's done to her hair and her scalp. And I mean, just this sense that she seems to be trying to meld with Michael so that in some way she erases her blackness and who she is. Do you see it that way too?
Yeah, definitely. She's trying to get as close to whiteness as possible. Like you said, with her hair, with the interactions with Michael, she wants to claim him as her husband, but we know that that will probably be impossible. Even when they were first dating, she talks about how they would sneak and swim in his parents' pool because they weren't accepting. But yeah, so JoJo is darker like her and Pop, and then Kayla gets a little bit closer to whiteness. But perhaps if they had one more child, they get it right, and that it would take on Michael's complexion. But we also talked about that with the naming of the children as well. So, of course, JoJo is named after Michael's father, who is kind of the person who evokes this negative sense of whiteness that she's trying to identify with and overcome both at the same time. And then Michaela, of course, is named after Michael. They call her Kayla. She doesn't like that because then it erases the Michael in her. So yeah, definitely I agree that she's trying to assimilate into this culture, perhaps in hopes that it will erase or rid some of the trauma from her life.
Kathy?
I'm enjoying reading this as a ghost story, and I find that every time one of the ghosts appear, it stops the action of the film, and it's almost as though the ghost is pointing out, pay attention to what's going on right now. In particular, I enjoyed the part about what is his name?
Richie,
that he can't find peace. He can't go where he needs to go until he hears the end of his story. And that he can't even be fully buried. He can't be part of the earth. And in being part of the earth, he joins the song, which I thought was just so beautiful to express that once your story's complete and you're buried, you join nature, you join the earth. So I've really enjoyed that part of the book.
I just want to point out that at one point when you were discussing your enjoyment of it, you said the film, which I thought was really interesting because actually when I had my interview with Jesmyn, where we talked about this book perhaps being adapted to film and how much she would love to see kind of Richie come to life on the screen, very much Toni Morrison beloved-esque, but I just thought it was interesting that you were already visualizing it.
Thank you for your comment, Kathy. This echoes the comment earlier from John Browning. He said he was unable to speak, but he was imagining these ghosts as functioning in the narrative as if they are like a Greek chorus. And I think that really like points to your meaning there, that they are there to emphasize, to say, pay attention. Thank you for that.
I've been thinking about it in terms of beloved as well.
I think I mentioned this kind of in my introduction, but she has been compared to Toni Morrison, in fact, called the new Toni Morrison, which she thinks is a heavy weight on her shoulders and one that she's not necessarily worthy of, but definitely there are lots of similarities.
Harriet.
I was just going to add to the idea of ghost that, the ghost is history. The idea of being haunted by histories is for me real present in that notion of ghost.
Absolutely. All right. Anyone want to start us off on one last, I think we have time for one last conversation here before we move on till next time. Pearl.
I joined late, so I hope I'm not repeating myself, but back to when Harriet was talking about the dark humor and Kayla throwing up, that puts me right in mind of Shirley T throwing up at the dinner table. Have you already said that? Because I always read that moment in Why I Live with PO is how Shirley T takes the power by stopping the conversation, and it's a beautiful moment of narrative power to shift everything that's happening by having somebody throw up. And then another Welty connection for me is on page 172. Richie is saying, even though it reminded me of so much cold, I think it would have been hot to touch, so hot it would have burned my fingers off. And to me, puts me right in mind of the heat and the hot and the temperature and where's the voice coming from. So just little comments.
Yeah.
Definitely, that's part of the reason why I asked the question about Kayla and throwing up on the officer too, because he is the representation of power during this particular incident. They're all afraid of him, but here you have this 3-year-old baby vomiting on him and basically displaying to him, oh, he's human too. Look what I can do. Look at the power that I can invoke by just vomiting on him. Now he feels disgusted, and the power that he has over them has shifted. Yeah.
Harriet. Nope.
I guess I just didn't take my hand down.
There was a comment that I don't think we got to. Someone was reiterating how the stories that JoJo was hearing from Pop were initially just stories, but after actually interacting with Richie, and especially after hearing the meaning, is something that JoJo will have to internalize and live with for the rest of his life. So kind of shifting from stories to lesson to kind of real life again, how past bears on the present. I thought that was just interesting to point out. Charla made that comment.
Also, the whole fact that stories are important. Stories need to be completed. The storyteller is important. Shaping the narrative, understanding your life by shaping it into a narrative, into a story. And that whole business of storytelling, I think, comes back here. Pearl.
Yes, and that idea that Carla was talking about, that Kamisha was just reminding us about, I'm thinking about how all the more recent studies and theories about how the body holds trauma and how each of these characters is holding within their bodies all these different traumas. And on occasion, we get to see an eruption of that trauma. Yes, thank you, Suzanne, for noticing that. But also on the power of storytelling that you were pointing out, to me, that also happens on page 171, sort of toward the beginning of chapter 8. So you may have already talked about this when Richie says, my name, Richie, I mouth. He looks at me like he wants to smile, but he doesn't. He told you about me, I nod. So this communication about what story, what's been told, what the names are, how much Richie is inquiring, like, well, what do you know about me? And then we find out he wants the end of his story to be told, I think, reading ahead, by JoJo, filtered through Pop's storytelling. So that need to know what your name is and who you are and what your story is, I think, is very powerful here for all the characters.
I just wanted to point out there's a line in Salvage the Bones specifically, but I thought it was powerful. Jesmyn Ward writes, bodies tell stories. And I thought that was a good connection to what you just said.
I think we're just about out of time. Kamisha, do you want to have the final word here?
Well, as always, I enjoyed the conversation. I'm especially looking forward to the next few chapters and kind of wrapping up Richie's and the family story in general, because I think it will answer some of the questions, especially some of your questions, Suzanne, that you were asking about why Pop doesn't want to have dogs and different things like that. We'll begin to understand more about the purpose of water as well that we've been discussing. So I'm interested to get to those chapters, but I've, like always, enjoyed the conversation that we had on today.
Well, we thank you for leading us, and we look forward to next time.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Anna, anything else?
That's it. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time and look for the email out on Fridays.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.